Welcome back. This is Garrett from Grace Community Church. You're listening to Grace Stories. Last week, or depending on how I release these, we talked to Jerod Starkey, the worship pastor here at Grace Community Church. The conversation was so awesome, but also a little longer than anticipated. And instead of just putting one big video out, we wanted to kind of break it up into two different parts so that it's a little easier to digest and work through and just really take the time with it that it deserves. And if you haven't listened to that one, I highly encourage you to go back, listen to part one of this conversation. It was really awesome. We got to talk about what led Jerod into ministry originally, and this week we're talking about what led him to the church and to our church specifically, and what that journey looked like, what that process looked like. And it was a super fun conversation. If you guys really like this, we really want you to share, and just engage with it and share it with your friends and different people who don't know what we're about here at Grace Community Church. I think this is a great example of what we, value and what we want to present as a church. And with all of that said, we will go ahead and transition to the rest of that conversation. Yeah. I think, that a lot of people, if they're in ministry, they see themselves as that you're playing this part, and you kind of have to, draw up all of this energy and all this stuff because it's, okay, I gotta, people are seeing me now. I gotta go out and I have to, act a certain way, and I have to say the right thing and do the right thing. And I think that is only compounded by a culture in the church of, I have to perform. I can't struggle. I can't, if someone asks me, well, how are you doing? I'm like, I'm blessed. I'm, all the cliches, too blessed to be stressed. God is good all the time and all that kind of stuff. And as much as it's true, there are also all of these, places in the Bible where you see, followers of Christ, you see God's people that are struggling with real issues. But I think, as of late, it's all become about, the archetype and the, perfect life. And I've got a family and kids and the house and the white picket fence and all of that kind of stuff. And so it doesn't give a lot of people that are just a part of the church room to be vulnerable and to be honest and to say, if someone says, well, how are you doing today? Oh, I'm good. How are you? And it's, you can't feel like you're able to say, I really have been struggling. I actually think I'm pretty depressed right now. Or I feel like I'm all alone in this, or I feel like I've been, alone in my job or my career or, whatever. And there's a stigma around that, I think over time, hopefully will start to change and grow. But if it's happening for people in the church, it can only be worse for the person that has to be up front, especially if you're in that position where you literally are in front of people every week, just like the teaching pastor, the lead pastor is. You're kind of just one step down from that because you have to go up and you've got to play the songs, the right songs, and you got to make it fit in, and you got to make sure people feel good and feel happy and all of that kind of stuff. And you're doing that even if maybe you're not feeling the same way. Were there moments where, you felt like there was a disillusionment from the church, or, you were looking at how do I cope with some of the things that I'm going through, some of the things that I'm struggling with, but do it in a way where I can still be the, Jerod, the worship pastor, on the weekdays and on Sunday, and I can be, whatever, in my spare time. How did you, I guess, compartmentalize?
Yeah. I remember some distinct Sunday mornings where one, I just didn't feel good, but didn't feel worthy, of leading other people. And God would, remind me during those times of worship that, He loved me and that He cared about me, and that, me performing this function and doing something that was in my heart was pleasing to Him, even if I wasn't, perfect and working on that. But what had happened was, I would basically wall off, from 7 until whatever when I was at home, and it was kind of like all the stress and the feeling unknown, or carrying people's problems too much, not being able to be authentic and real and say, hey, I think I need to go to the doctor because I'm depressed. Having I grew up in I'm not bagging on Baptist, but I grew up in a kind of situation where it was like, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps kind of deal. And so none of that stuff was working. And, you do that for enough years, all that stuff not working. I found that alcohol did work as far as like, you can go to sleep, you can stop thinking, you can basically just fuzz out. It's like the edges of the picture. You can just fuzz out everything that's bothering you and kind of get through to the next day where you gussy back up and go to church and start doing it again. And so you have two totally different lives, but then it just makes it worse, because then you're inside, you're still the same person trying to, and you're like crying out sort of on the inside, like, oh my gosh, will somebody please see that I'm not everything that I'm cracked up to be? But at the same time, please don't, I don't want to stop doing this, because I love it and I genuinely love people, but you just get kind of stuck,
Yeah. Now, you find yourself, and, if you're doing full-time vocational ministry, it's a, 9 to 5 kind of a job. There's the chance that, you feel like you always have to be on, in that sense. But as a husband, a dad, did you put unnecessary expectations on yourself there as well? Because it's one thing to be able to do that, at work or whatever, to say, I'm just gonna, try harder. And if I just work harder, I be better, do more, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then eventually it will work out. And did you feel like you had to also, in a sense, perform when you got home as well?
Well, yeah, because I mean, there was, not only do my kids, my kids' life and my wife's life also is, at this point, my oldest is, in elementary school, and, her social and, spiritual and everything is pretty wrapped up in church too. And of course my wife's is. And so, I'm trying to, in some ways, perform at home even more, because I don't want to let them down. That, well, you don't want them to see that you're divided and two people. And so that's why, like, for me, my particular coping mechanism of alcohol was mostly, regulated to like late evenings and being by myself, because I couldn't ever reconcile the things that were happening inside my heart and the person who I was on the outside. And so it was just so much, discontent. But I even, I did my best to hide that from my kids even, which is just another, piece of keeping up appearances and keeping up, you're still a great dad. But, and at the same time, I will say, especially as, when people are dealing with bad coping mechanisms, it doesn't negate or disqualify everything that you with an authentic heart want to do with Christ. Mm-hmm. So it's not like, the another part of the struggle was God was doing really awesome things at the same time. Like I was broken and messed up, and at the same time, my daughter's getting baptized and my small group's growing like weeds, and I'm watching people like invite people and love on people. And so it wasn't like, just because you're messed up, God's absent. Like he's very present and still doing huge things and even still using you. Mm-hmm. But then, you're the pastor and you plan yourself, well, if I could get it together, he'd use me even more, which is the total wrong motivation for getting things right and dealing with your brokenness. But it's a crazy trap, for pastors.
Yeah. I've said this before, oftentimes I feel like God can work in spite of me instead of through me. And if I always feel like he has to work through me and it always is about me and what I'm doing, I'm setting myself up for failure. I'm not giving him, the credit and the glory that he deserves. And I also can shortchange the people that I'm doing those things with. It takes all of that off of me to say, sometimes God's working in spite of me and in spite of the mistakes and the things that I'm doing. And I think it takes, some people might not want to see it that way, and they might want to say, well, if it, I have to be, doing this, and if I'm not, then that person's not going to get saved, or they're not going to be able to have an experience with God. And so you're putting more of that on you, and you're putting more of the expectations of they need me. They need me to be a certain way or to do a certain thing. And, it's not something that probably won't be sustainable, over a long period of time. And so, as you're, struggling, did you, how is your, position or vocation kind of changing and developing over time? And as you're also struggling with substance and different things, what did you tell yourself, day to day to get through it? I mean, were you, saying, well, I've got this under control. It's not, I don't have to worry about it. I'm still, functioning, I'm still managing, things are still getting done. What was the tension like?
Yeah. Well, it was crazy because, I love getting things done. I mean, I was the most high functioning, person with a substance problem, and hit it so well, that, it was the point, I'd never had any resolution. I couldn't honestly say to myself that I had it under control. I think I would, try to give myself a narrative, all the time that when this happens, then you'll feel better or be happier. And that's when and then you can grab onto that thing more than you grab onto your coping mechanism. And I was trying to create that for myself and well, maybe, maybe if your job shifts like this and you take on this responsibility, or maybe if you can help grow the church in this way and you see success in this area, you can start to move out of, this being unhappy or feeling a certain way, and it'll get better. But I knew it probably wouldn't. And, but I was really trying hard. And what the most freeing point of the whole deal as far as alcohol goes was when I was able to say out loud to people who were on staff or people who were in my, small group or whatever, I have a problem with this and I can't control it. And then, not to get into the whole thing about being able to give things names and what that means and be able to call sin out. But there was an aspect where it lost a lot of power in my life when I was able to speak it out loud to people that I didn't know what was going to happen with my job or with my ministry, but I knew that, there was people around me that I could speak the truth to, and they were going to say, okay, I still love you. But that's not okay. You can't, that's not the best that God has for you. But I had held on to it for so long and, created this whole thing that I thought I could control, that once I finally let go of that, I can't even describe to you the relief. And it was like, oh, you're a real person again.
Yeah.
And now you can start to figure stuff out.
So, how long, were you working at the church, and doing some of the different things, different roles and things that you'd had, and how long, were you keeping a lot of that stuff inside, and what was the breaking point? What let you feel comfortable enough or able to be able to say out loud and confide in people, I've got a problem with this, or I'm struggling with this? And then what was, was there like a fallout? Was there anything, because of that, of being honest, because for some people, there's a stigma around those sort of things, and it becomes not about how do we help you grow, but we don't want the image. We don't want that image.
Yeah. Well, I would define my struggle with alcohol being about a decade-long one. I had been at that church for about 8-ish sort of years, and there were times, where I would do better and times where I would do worse and things like that. I'd gone to, counseling here and there and all, done some different things, but it was, it had never stuck because I don't think that I truly had a repentant heart. And I really think that, so the fallout was when I was arrested for the DWI and that it created, and I believe that God, will allow these things to happen. He will create, or he will, allow us to, live in our sin and allow moments to happen that can break that cycle. And so it was after that, I was in a way, it was forced because I couldn't, I guess I could have tried to hide it, but it was too much. God had broken, some stuff inside of me, or allowed some things to happen so that I could see really what was broken inside of me. But it wasn't, he had started working in my heart after that arrest so much that I didn't have the desire to hide it anymore. But also just knew that it wasn't possible. And so, that's when it started to come out. And so the fallout was, interesting because, there was certain people, there wasn't so much a fallout as there was a, hey, let's come around this family. He has really young kids. I was going to rehab. I was out of pocket a lot. I, just had different things to do. And so people, Elaine and I would need to have conversations about different things, and they would, watch our kids for us. And, So there was a big group of people who do that, but there was a lot of people who honestly just didn't know how to handle it. So it wasn't that they were, mad at me. I'm sure there was a lot of people. I mean, I had a lot of people express disappointment in me, which was totally fair. I mean, I was disappointed in myself, but they didn't know how to deal with that pastor who, man, he leads me every week, and then on Wednesdays, like he's helping me understand how to pray and da 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 da. And he met what? And so it's just like I don't know. So they kind of like.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like a volitional mean thing, and they didn't know how to come towards that because they'd never experienced it before. And then, as far as being in a church, especially, Dallas is a rat racy kind of place. It's a highly competitive place. And as much as you don't want to, pit churches against one another, there's just, it's a culture of, people are saying, where do I get fed the best? And I like the music there better. It's just part of how it is. And so, touting somebody's brokenness isn't really a popular idea. And so I think there was just a lot of, oh boy, we don't want the scandal of this moment. We also don't want to, in a way that didn't, want to parade my family around, which I appreciated. But it's also, doesn't happen that often. I think that's why it is scandalous, because like, oh, pastor gets arrested for, that's a juicy little tidbit. And so I think part of, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because part of you wants to, quell that gossipy thing and allow people to heal. But another part of it is a self-sustaining, like, I don't want to have anything to do with that. So we got really alone really fast.
Yeah. I can imagine in moments like that, there might be different mindsets of, we're praying for them and we care about them, but we also, how much do I want to get my hands dirty? Especially if it's one thing to be able to be retrospective about someone's problems or issues. It's different to be able to say, let's walk through it with them. And, that it just takes more dedication and more, time and energy, for any leader to be able to do that, or for even, someone that's a friend or someone that's in your small group to say, they were the ones that were pouring into me, now I have to, pour into them. And, it can be a difficult situation to be put in. And I think that different people are going to respond in different ways, but it also can quickly kind of, separate people and point out, different groups of people that, are willing to put in the effort, and then some that maybe, are more of come back to us when you've got it figured out.
Right.
We want you to get better, but maybe we just don't want you to do it here.
Totally.
And, I think, there's so many, factors and complications involved. Question for you is what was that time like for you and your relationship with God, you and your relationship with your family, and then you and your relationship with your church?
So my relationship with God changed just so quickly, because, when He allows things to get stripped away, you can really kind of see, what your relationship with God is made of. And I realized, what parts there were strong and what parts there were weak and were lacking. And so when you take away, knowing that you're going to be in front of people, knowing that what you feel like it gives you importance and significance, when those things start to be stripped away, you rely and depend on him in a totally different way and start communing with him in a different way. So I would, just sit and just meditate on Psalms and talk to God in a way that I hadn't done in years, because I wasn't finding peace and solace in God. I'd been finding it somewhere else. And so it gave me the opportunity to rearrange where I was finding my hope and my satisfaction. And so that immediately started changing my relationship with my family, because especially, my kids, I wanted them to be a part of this process with me, because not being a part of the process is how I got to where I was, because we, especially my growing up experience, there was a lot of taboo things. Like, you don't talk about somebody drinking too much. I mean, please. It might be a little more acceptable now to have a conversation about in church, or maybe in certain church cultures. But at that time, it was like, there's things you don't talk about. So I wanted to break down that, thing with my kid, that there was you can talk about anything, and everything that you could possibly be going through, feeling, experiencing, or whatever, are actually, you're supposed to talk about them in front of God and in your faith community, because that's what allows you to have the chance to shift what you believe and what you think and change your habits and be obedient. And, it was because I had done such a good job of hiding that it had built up so much that I had become, basically two different people in a sense. And so I wanted to be one person, the same person at church and at work and with my wife and with my kids, so that there wasn't, there was never any question to them who their dad was, and that they could trust their dad. With Elaine, there was a lot of repairing to do, a lot of forgiveness to be asked for, and a whole lot of trust to be rebuilt. And a lot of that happened through rehab and stuff. And with the church, it just really, I think that sometimes, there are relationships that make us feel good in the moment, or, are just nice to have, like, and I think that, I've figured out that, a lot of times what we call community at church is not nearly as deep as you think it is. And, but we found out which relationships were really deep. And you sort of know, but I think that sometimes we, pat ourselves on the back, and we say we're doing community, and we're doing it the way God wanted us to do it, because we're, showing up and going through the motions of some Bible study, with a group of 8 people, which I would say keep doing forever, because I think it's so important, but do it in a real way instead of just making it another, Sunday morning, check the box. And I did worship and I did small groups, so I'm good, and now I can go live my life. Like, the relationships that we had at church that were really, the formative ones that help you develop your relationship with God and your worldview, were the ones that were intact, and the rest, honestly, just vanished. And as hurtful as that kind of was, it was also just, it just was evidence of what was already true. It wasn't like they were ever really deep and meaningful to begin with.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds mean, but it was, you can play church or you can actually do church.
Yep. Yeah. And if it's all up to you to be the arbiter of that relationship and to make it happen. It's only going to be as deep as you can make it if they're not, also invested in it. And it puts a lot of pressure on you to, just keep pushing. And if you're, finally starting to, work through your own issues, you don't have time for that. You can't invest in yourself and also, fully invest in someone else. You have to be able to learn what you can invest in and what you don't have time for. And it's, a process of learning how to say no, or, how do I balance my time at the church and with my family and with myself and God, and what's important, what's valuable. And, I think over time, God can start to show you what's important, and what is important to him may not always be what's important to you. Right. But the point is, your spirit starting to align with God's spirit. And the other thing that stands out to me is, I think there's an expectation or a, culture that the conversion experience that someone has will also, fully envelop that sanctification experience that you want. And you think, well, if I just believe in God and I accept him, that life will be easier, or it'll be better, or, I won't have any more struggles, or I won't, deal with these things. And I think what people often do is they confuse the salvation with sanctification, and not allowing that sanctification to be a process and to be God's. And it's not yours. You can't manufacture that. It's all up to him and the work that he does. And so, it sounds like, during that time, you're starting to work through that and realize that, it's not about what you can do or manufacture or work through and just, churn out. So, as you're healing and starting to, come to grips with those realities and the things that God's wanting you to work through, did you feel like ministry, local church ministry was still something for you, for your family? Or did you feel like it was something that you needed to, maybe it was, not, maybe that wasn't what you were meant to do?
Well, that's exactly what I remember sitting and talking with Elaine, and I had, moved on from that particular job and was, we were starting to at least be able to talk about the future. And she was like, do you want to do this anymore? Because this seems, you didn't really seem to, it caused you so much. You didn't deal with it really well. Mm-hmm. And, now that things are being kind of reset and reframed in your life, do you really want to go back to that? Mm-hmm. Which I really appreciated her asking, because I needed to get back to that idea of, do I have a calling for the local church or not? Mm-hmm. And on top of that, I had just a lot of different opinions and words of advice, I guess, from people that I, kind of trusted, from people that I really trusted, that basically said, this might be the end of the road for you. Mm. I mean, maybe in 5 years you can be a pastor again. I don't know. There's everybody kind of had this arbitrary system that I was going to have to go through if I ever even wanted to do ministry again. Mm-hmm. Like there was some way that I could prove that, the change that was happening in me was real, or, maybe if you just lay low for a little while, it'll all dissipate and then you can kind of get back into it. And then, there was my own fear that, well, you have a record and people mm-hmm. will see that and judge you off of that before they ever you won't ever have a chance to get, even have conversations with people. So I had a lot of negative, this, you really may have ruined this thing in your life. So you may not be able to have it again, but I just couldn't get away from feeling like even this part of my journey and the mistakes I made and the transformation that I experienced was part of the ministry that God was giving me. Because from the get-go, having to, kind of come clean with different people, where I felt like all I was doing, was apologizing and trying to be open and authentic. And I'm a blubbering mess, just a mess. Because I'm so ashamed and I'm so sad that I disappointed people. And I would be like, bye, I'm going to leave now, and just trying to kind of tuck tail and run. And somebody would literally run after me every time and grab me and say, my dad, I think he's struggling with X, Y, or Z, or my brother, or can I talk to you? And I'm like, I'm not even at the place of being able to do that at all. And I knew that. But God was already showing me like, hey, I can use this too. Like I will use all things to bring people unto myself. And I couldn't get rid of that. I felt like I ought to. It was an oughtness. You ought to be telling people about your story. You ought to be leading people in worship and giving all of who you have to the local church because you still really believe in it. And so to still really believe in Jesus and his work and also believe in his church after going through all the hurt, I think is what gives me a lot of hope for the local church. It makes me really excited about it because I'm like, awesome. I mean, it can be really awesome. So, in that way, it kind of just redefined, helped sort of clarify, what God was calling me to do, and also slough off some of the things that I think I was letting myself, get my identity from, and him just saying, that's really not it. Just do these, and whatever task you perform, great, and do it well, but don't go home and lay down at night and say, well, that was a really good Sunday morning. No, the people that I've put in your life and in the local church, those, like Paul says, those are your crown of rejoicing. Like those relationships and the souls that are, being, shaped into what God wants them to be. That's the thing to be joyful about.
Yeah, it makes me think, I think that often, and you see it in, children's, Sunday school where you highlight all the things that biblical character did well and you ignore all of the moments where they messed up and they failed. And I think it takes away from the fact that God he never called anyone in the Bible to lead or serve because they were perfect, because they were better than anyone else, but he did it to, in a way, magnify his own power and glory to say, I choose to work through these people not because of how well they can perform, but because of how they will follow me and repent and, admit when they've failed. And a lot of times there are, people in the Bible that never did. And for a lot of those people, it never worked out. and that it's not about me emulating those characters, but it's about me following after the example that Christ set. And I think it's hard to come to a point where you can say, my ministry, and you hear that, my ministry is not about me, it's about God. And ultimately, I'm just a steward of the things that God's put into my life or he's given me, whether it's the abilities that I have or the people that I'm with, or the place that I've been put in. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes it does take brokenness to start working through that and experience that. And so you still feel that call to ministry, but how long did the process look like of working through some of the things in the relationships that you had, with different people, and did you immediately just jump back into a church?
Oh my gosh, no. We did not immediately jump back into a church. I was going through all those things, going through rehab, and Sundays for a while were just Sundays at home. And those were really painful Sundays when we weren't at church, because it was just a really, really stark reminder that we had, in some ways great, our whole life was church, and in some ways not so great, that our whole life was church. But we had wrapped up our family in church, and so it took months to get to a place where I was even willing to go to church. Not because I was mad at God or because whatever, but it was really hurtful, the idea of going and watching somebody do what I love to do. Super ugh. And having all that negative stuff in my head that you may not ever be able to do it again. It's just I don't want to be reminded of that, on Sunday morning. And that's not why we go anyway. We go to trust in God. And so that took months. And then all along the while, I started working somewhere else, and just going through lots of conversations about, what do we want church to be, and what do we want it to look like, and everything from how close do we want to live to our church, because in Dallas we were at a commuter church.
Yeah,
it was in the middle of town. There's not houses around there, so you drove 30-40 minutes to church. And so we were reassessing, man, wouldn't it be nice to live 5 minutes from your church to where you could do life, real life, with people. So yeah, it was a good, it was almost, I guess 10 months until we ended up here in Bartlesville.
So, you're kind of, taking time, you're reassessing things, all the while, I probably in the back of your mind thinking about, where can I go with the baggage? Where can I go? Maybe you felt stamped or marked in a way where, is anyone going to be willing to take a risk on me and what I've gone through, even in spite of some of the growth or some of the different things that you've probably experienced over that time. And really quick, what was it like when you found out about this? What did that process look like about Grace Community Church, and reassessing not just do I want to work in a church, but do I want to make that a part of my life again?
Yeah. Well, the question about stamped is really good, because I am stamped. I mean, I have a record, and I almost in some ways praise God for that, because I do praise God for that, because it helped clearly define some things for me. I don't want to be at a church who doesn't want somebody that's stamped, because I don't want to belong to that kind of a church. If they don't want me, I don't want them, because it's not a fundamental belief that I have now, is that we're all stamped and we're all broken. It's not if you're going to go through a hard time, it's when you're going to go through a hard time, when you're going to mess up, when you're going to have to deal with your own brokenness. And so everybody, they might have a stamp from the government like I do, but they're going to be stamped with something. And I want to be in a place where it's okay to come with that baggage, not to revel in it or glory in it, and not that, but to be able to walk through the doors with it and say, I'm this, that, or the other. But I have found a place where my identity now lies in Christ. So I can say, I am a Christian that also happens to struggle with alcohol. I don't walk around, saying that I'm an alcoholic because that's not where I find my identity. My identity is in Christ. So that was a huge, God just really cleared some things up in my mind, because I was like, man, if you're more worried about those kinds of stamps than you are about my spirit and about what I'm doing, it's not really not my place, not the church that I'm really working on. Not that he's not working there, but I'm not going to go there. So Rod Elaine's brother is married to Rod's daughter. And so we had a couple of phone conversations, and I was just going to come and lead during some interim time. And, the cool thing about Rod is that I'd met him once years before, but by no means knew him. And, but we had a lot of conversations on the phone. He's also, DTS guy and adjunct there and whatever, but also really, it's just wanted to continue to pursue the presence of God at Grace Community Church, and also has a very deep understanding of brokenness and recovery, having started Celebrate Recovery, here with Cindy like 15 years ago now, I believe. And so one of our first conversations was, he wanted Grace Community Church to live up to its name. It's a place of grace. It's also a place that focuses on community. And so, honestly, I was overwhelmed when there was even the beginnings of a conversation about me being a part here, because it flew in the face of all the negative things that had been spoken over me, that I was disqualified, that I would have to wait 5 years or 7 or whatever that was. And so for him to even invite me to come as a guest to lead worship was like, oh, God may allow me to be a part of this again. God may restore this thing to me that I want him to restore it. I don't want to, I wasn't out like on churchjobs.com trying to find, I wasn't there yet.
Yeah.
But I also wasn't opposed to it. I was just telling Elaine, and we were praying that if God, wanted to do something, that he would do it, and that I would receive a phone call, that I wouldn't just randomly start, sticking my hands out in places and trying to find. I just wanted to be faithful and obedient, and for God to somehow, lead me to where he wanted me to be. And so, Rod calls, and it's like, okay. So I was listening very intently from the beginning. And then, we, came from Dallas to Bartlesville a couple times, and I was really impressed with the culture of authenticity here. It wasn't lots of smoke and lights and dazzling things. Not that it wasn't, excellent, but the focus wasn't about a production or a performance. I've always felt like from Rod and from the different ministries that exist here that it was about a whole person. So that was, super attractive to me and Elaine.
Yeah. I know it's Rod's hope and for this church, to be able to be honest and open. And we talk about transformation But if we're not open to, allowing that in all parts of someone's journey and someone's experience, whether that's in the midst of it or, at the tail end of it or, at the beginning of it, it's not, if we're not open to that, then we're not really open to God actually working in the lives of people. And by no means do we do it perfectly, but my hope, even with, allowing people to be able to hear this, something like this, it's, hopefully, making it just more prominent and, allowing people to be vulnerable, to be honest, and, to reevaluate or to start the process of evaluating their own lives. What are the things that I'm struggling with or working through? How does God still use someone like me and not feeling, qualified because of their performance or disqualified because of their failures and mistakes, but to feel that all of their worth and what they're doing is wrapped up in Christ. And so I appreciate, that part of your story and, the fact that you're, we're all in a process, and, any one of us on staff is not, done with anything. We've not, figured it out, and we don't have a formula, and we don't have all the answers all the time, but we can start to have these conversations about, struggles and the highs and the lows of just life in general. And so, finishing up, is there anything for someone that's, that's stuck it out and they're still watching or listening, what would you say to them?
Well, first I would say that, wherever you kind of are in your relationship with God or your process, that if you've gotten to a place where you feel stuck or, maybe you're on that line of, I really wish I could tell somebody about this part of my life, but I'm wondering, will they still accept me and love me? To really not wait on that prompting from God, to continue to pursue Him and push in your prayer to figure out what that next step is. Especially if you're here, at Grace, we have so many different avenues of people who their calling is to receive you. Like CR is, especially with, different types of addictions and the habits and things like that. CR is meant and it's built. And I know Tracy, wants to receive that person and give them a place to make those next steps. I know Mike is a fantastic counselor and is willing, to sit down and spend some time with people, helping them figure out what the next step of the process is. If I could do anything over, it would have been not to stiff arm that process so much that I was forced to go through tragedy. It's kind of dramatic, but forced to go through such a hard time to figure it out. But I didn't, without saying it every morning, and I hope that, being this church's worship pastor and them knowing my story, by them knowing my story, that it affirms every Sunday morning that we're not trying to build a culture of perfect people. We're trying to build a place where people come to grow and to receive help and to communicate with each other about their real Christian journey. And I hope that, just seeing me and being reminded of my story is a helpful thing, to where it's like, well, he didn't always have it all together. So I can also, it's okay for me right now to be here in this place. I'm accepted in this place and totally not perfect. And so my encouragement would be to definitely run towards your church and your church staff, and to reach out and take the next step. I mean, I would love to, talk to anybody about, whatever it is. That's my heart, is to, share and be a part of that process.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to share a lot of that with me. And I know that you've had opportunities to talk to people about some of the things they've gone through already. And I think that, as time goes on, you're only going to get more of those opportunities. And, anyone out there that's listening, as Christians, we're not called to be perfect in a way where everything just works out and we don't have flaws and mistakes, but perfection is wholeness, and it's being the person that God made you to be. And you're not going to get to that place if you don't start to admit that you need God in different areas, and you want to give up yourself fully to the work that He wants to do in your life, and the things that the Spirit can be present in. And so, once again, Jerod, thank you for, your honesty and being able to come on and do this and share. I know that parts of it probably aren't easy.
Yeah. Okay.
It's easy for me to be able to just ask the questions. And for any of you, please, reach out to him, reach out to Elaine,
Yes.
Ask them questions, meet with them, talk with them, and don't be afraid to reach out to us as a church. If you, are looking for anything else, Jerod, is there anywhere that you'd want to point people as far as online, goes for yourself?
Yeah. I think you can pretty much contact, me through email it's on the website, but it's just Jerod at gccbartlesville.org. We'd be happy to get in touch that way.
And if you are looking for more conversations like this, there are more conversations like this. You can find them on our YouTube channel. You can find them audio versions if you search for Grace Stories. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, you can find all the links to all of our social media on our website, gccbartlesville.org, and you can follow us online at gccbartlesville. And just thank you once again for listening, watching. Please, if you're not subscribed and you're watching right now, please subscribe, share. If you have been listening to these in audio formats, take the time to give a rating, hopefully a good one if you've been enjoying them. And we will talk to you next week.